All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of That Jesus Podcast. I'm here with some guests. I don't know where Drew and Chris are. They might hop in here. But right now, I'm in the lion's den because in our last episode, I mentioned that as long as MAGA exists, I will vote blue. And I have traditionally been very against voting. Every time there's an election in the US, I've been posting upside down American flags with the caption, "I did not vote." And yeah, let's just hop into that, why that was the case. So for the president of the United States, I would my one-liner was, I am voting for the commander-in-chief of the largest organization in the history of mankind that is solely dedicated to not loving their enemies. So I'm like, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to do that as someone who believes in nonviolence. And then kind of for other offices, the idea is, well, the kingdoms of this world are in opposition to the reign of Christ. Therefore, any sort of support for them is supporting coercion, and it's supporting using at least the threat of violence, at the least, to accomplish my my moral agenda for the world. And that's just not how these things work. So I was very adamant against it, and would argue against voting. And I've started to shift my position. I'm still not 100% sure where I land, but at this point, I don't see anything um, in voting that would contradict an Anabaptist worldview or a Kingdom Christian worldview or just a Christian worldview. And it's because I think the primary reason is because I take voting less seriously. I think that it's a pretty simple act that might accomplish a little bit, but just doesn't have sort of this grandiose sort of attachment that many people put onto it. For example, and this is the analogy that I've been using. If there was a huge bull on the streets, or buffalo, since I'm in India, and it was charging at a group of kids, and I had the opportunity to, like, since I'm in India, gently push it out of the way. I won't do anything violent to it. But if I had the opportunity to do something to somehow alter the course of this bull so that it does not hit the kids, why wouldn't I do that? Now, that's not to say that I agree with what the bull is doing. I might not even like the bull, but I simply have an opportunity to alter its course. That's kind of the way I'm viewing the government. So my theology has not changed when it comes to two kingdom theology or even Christian anarchism. I do believe that the United States of America is fundamentally a rival nation to the kingdom of God, and that violence is always wrong, that the use of violence and the threat of violence by the state is morally wrong. And I think I would even go further than conservative Anabaptists on that, who would say, oh, it's not wrong, but we don't do it as Christians. I would say it's wrong. I think everything that's right, Christians can do. So I would say it's wrong, but God does sovereignly use it for his purposes. Having said that it's wrong, if there's another analogy I'll use is, if there's a gang that or if there's rival gangs who ask me their opinion, who should run the streets, and one of them is clearly far less violent, far less problematic than the other one, then I can give them my opinion and say I'd rather this one runs the streets, which is technically what a government is. It's a big gang that just has a monopoly on violence. So I mean, we can kind of use these analogies, but my basic premise is that if someone comes and asks my opinion about um, which of these sort of bad things is going to cause less problems for people, then I think it's pretty insignificant to say, well, this one's going to cause less problems. Why don't you go ahead and do that? So yeah, that's kind of my setup here. We have Josh and Allie Parker, we have Sarah Beiler and Matthew Milioni joining us, and so we're gonna kinda take turns here, and they're gonna grill me, starting with, Allie Parker, I believe,
Oh gosh.
or Josh. So, thank you guys for joining the show here, and, yeah, go ahead.
Um, so you mentioned I try to write down some notes just so that I could maybe ask some follow-up questions. Do
Uh-huh.
you so when you mention voting, I'm assuming do you mean just voting for like the president?
Well, I think that voting for the president would be the most problematic thing to do. So, no, I would say voting across the board in any election in the United States. Um, but yeah, voting for the president I would say be the strongest argument against voting for the president because he or she is the commander in chief of the armed forces, yeah. But I would vote for anyone at this point. I don't think it's problematic to vote for anyone.
Okay. So, would you say that there's like then if commander in chief is most problematic, so
Right.
then there are less problematic ways to vote if I'm understanding like different levels, for instance, like uh let's say like the mayor versus voting for the Senate, somebody in the Senate or like school board or something.
Right.
So you would have a distinction between like those things.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, like, voting for your school board, they're not using the threat of violence to accomplish well, hopefully not, to maybe Drew can disagree here. But yeah, they're not using the sword to accomplish what they're trying to do, and so you're just putting people into those positions who will hopefully be able to teach children well. Um, I don't think I was ever against that, but yeah, I would say that there's a sort of a spectrum of, like, how uneasy a Christian should get, and the more that the person you're voting for is responsible for violence, I would say it becomes more problematic potentially, yeah.
Okay. So I think just for me, humbly kind of working through this whole topic, one of the most difficult things to wrestle with is where we draw the line with investing into the worldly kingdom from the perspective that, well, it's to keep order. Where would you draw that line then? I guess voting's not the line there,
Right.
like how much involvement, um I'm trying to explain this a little bit more tangibly. How much work or effort do you put on a daily basis to make the world for the sake of the world a better place, I guess?
Mhm.
Um,
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think making the world a better place is really important, for Christians, not just thinking about the afterlife. Maybe that wasn't your question, but the first thing you said, like, how involved I would get. I would not serve in any position in the government, probably period. Certainly not a position where I'm putting legislation into effect that relies on the threat of violence. So I wouldn't run for office, I wouldn't do that. Something like school board, sure, why not? That doesn't require the threat of violence. But police officer, governor, senator, yeah. Um, Once again, I'm not endorsing the government. I'm just saying, as a Christian, if they're asking our opinion about what's better, why not tell them? Because I think there's this sort of both sidesism fallacy that I reject. It's to say, well, both sides are equally bad. No, both sides are not equally bad. There are, and I don't think it's very hard, especially today, to figure out which side is clearly worse. Like if the Nazis were worse, I'm not calling Trump a Nazi, but uh,
sure.
the Nazis were worse than the alternative. I mean, and many times certain governments are worse than the alternative. Doesn't mean they're not both bad. It's just I think we can kind of pull our heads out of the sand and be like, okay, obviously this is objectively worse for my neighbors than this. And if they're gonna ask my opinion, why not tell them? Here's the thing, we spout our opinions all the time. Kingdom Christians are constantly talking about politics. But as soon as the government comes and asks us, well, we actually want you to give us your opinion, and we're actually gonna kind of do something based on it, we're like, "Oh, no, 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 we can't do that." That's where I see kind of the inconsistency.
Okay.
I wonder if
Where
Matthew would say that Christians shouldn't have opinions on politics or shouldn't be spouting off their opinions like on politics, Titus.
Matthew's not allowed to talk yet, but go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, he can talk, that's fine.
Well,
I'm dutifully waiting my turn.
yeah, yeah. Well,
We're all
I think
taking
we had to
turns,
finish
Drew.
wrapping up, so we would talk
Wait,
Oh.
what is
first.
this podcast?
Just be quiet, Drew. You don't know what's happening here.
Yeah.
So I guess for my framework, one point that stuck out was one side is objectively worse than another, and I think you were expressing that a lot of times kingdom Christians would say, well, both sides are um, evil in their ways that they work or run things. Well, if Trump is not Hitler, which we know he's not, hopefully not, here, what then about this one specific party is so much worse than the other that kind of changed your mind to, I guess, go that direction? Without going into too much topical political details, if there's a possible way to just kind of have like
A summary.
like a summary or overview.
Sure. I mean, it's a little cringy to be like, okay, finally it's gotten to be this bad that I need to vote. I understand that because like the Amish did that when Bush was running against Kerry, and I'm a little self-aware about that. Um, so my argument or my change of position, I'm sure it was influenced by the current administration. But that's not the evidence for it. It can't be. Um, because I think I mean, you can argue about which administration or policies are better, and I think in every election, there's been one administration that objectively would be worse than the other. I think it would be a very crazy coincidence if they were both like equally bad exactly. Like that's just not how the world works. But yeah, with Trump, honestly, I think some of his policies have been bad, but that's not my main concern, and I mentioned this in the previous podcast. My main concern with him is that he's following certain patterns that and I we argued about this with Chris, but I don't think America's a fascist regime right now, but he's following certain patterns that fascist leaders have followed in order to consolidate power. And I think he's made it very obvious that if he could have complete and total power in the United States, he would take it. He's tried to,
So
overturn an election. He's hinted about running a third term. And then along with that, just the divisiveness, the sort of ripping apart of all norms for the presidency, norms for how leaders function. I believe like America is sort of like a frog in the boiling water. It's just gotten used to it now, and it's normal now, and it's fine to kind of talk about running a third term and try to overturn elections and just say whatever and just lie constantly. Like that sort of undermining of our culture, I think is dangerous. And I think it could be the downfall of America. And maybe America ending is not the end of the world. I mean, quite literally, it's not. But I don't want America to end. I mean, I run a business with all American clients, and if America went down, like I would lose all my customers, and I don't know. It would be hard for me personally if America went under. Um, I don't want people to suffer, and generally, when countries collapse, people suffer, including I would suffer. So selfishly, I don't want it to, but I don't want others to suffer as well.
so like a lot of things arguing against Trump would be more of like the social policies rather than like economic policies, kind of what you're saying?
No, it's not even policy. It's not even. I
Okay.
mean, I do think there's been some policies that have hurt people, like ending foreign aid to the poorest countries and then expanding our military with that money. But So, but once again, my main gripe is not policies. It's his rhetoric, it's his divisiveness, it's his attempts at undermining democracy. Those are my main issues I have with him.
Would you
And
say
being in a country where go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were finished. You can continue.
Oh, I was just saying, I mean, living in a country where there's corruption through every part of government, and that's the main reason why this country is not developing faster. I don't want America to be that. Like, I don't want the sort of I mean, I'm a little out of my wheelhouse. I don't actually know that much about economics and all this, but I started reading Why Nations Fail. And I got through about half of it, and it made a lot of sense that, like, the reason why certain countries don't develop quickly is because of politics, essentially. I believe that's fairly uncontested. And I don't want America to be in the situation that this country's in, because I see a lot more people suffering here materially than I see in America. And so, and I do think, like, as believers, we want people to flourish in every way, spiritually, emotionally, and materially.
Okay. Um, so kind of like some buzzwords, so to say, um, you were concerned of a fascist regime because of Trump's personality, the rhetoric, things that come about. Um,
Right.
would you say that, so kind of to go on the political topic, I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate. I wouldn't consider myself conservative, but would you say that in the 2024 election nominees, when the Democrats had picked their candidate, that when they hand-picked Kamala Harris and did not have a preterm vote for her, would you say that that would be sort of a fascist type regime as well, to have a hand-picked nominee rather than them voting for their nominee? Because that is what happened.
I don't know. Maybe I do think this is a bit of an
I
example
mean, because
of
according to our
of both sides.
Constitution, we are, well, I guess from the, law from the Constitution, we're supposed to be, we the people are supposed to be, I'm speaking we the people, general America, I'm not saying from Anabaptist, that perspective, but we're supposed to be voting our nominees. And that was one thing that was very interesting in that election, is that she was handpicked. That totally broke the whole
Mhm.
rule, you know? Again, I'm not saying that I'm arguing for Trump, but I'm
You're
saying I see
anyways.
on both sides that we had a
Right.
lot of very similar type things going on the other side as well.
So I'm sympathetic to your the overall thrust of that question, that both sides are corrupt and both sides play dirty politics. From sort of a social studies perspective, no, they were actually fully within their rights to do that. That was a political nomination at a political party convention, not actually voting. The truth is, we've gotten far much more democratic and away from a Republican form of government, where we're more directly representing the will of the people. In the last 100 years, we've repealed, or we've changed amendments, so there's direct voting of our representatives. But that specific case of Kamala Harris being chosen was not a violation of the Constitution in a way, shape, or form. But I do agree with your overall point.
Yeah, I mean, I think Drew's distinguishing between a political parties can do whatever they want. They can allow the populace to vote, or they can just pick their nominee. Because, I mean, you can start a political party today and heavy-handedly nominate yourself and run, you know?
But even
It's the
if,
general election.
oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm so sorry I interrupted you again on there.
No, you're
But would
fine.
you say that even if, I guess, to Drew's point, the political party, if they desire to have that right, would you say though that that's still, whether or not that's legally in place, would you say that, well, the other party did allow a vote? Would that undermine any doubts or thoughts about fascism, I guess, on the other side because I think a um a party that is truly going in the direction of fascism, at least by the fruit of how that election went, it doesn't seem like having people vote for somebody would go that direction, if that makes sense. And so I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reveal, are these maybe presumptions about these what ifs going on? Are they legitimate what if concerns? Because I'm trying to look at both sides objectively, how we can see how, oh, maybe this could be seen in this light as
Right.
well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, this is just us observing things, and everyone's going to interpret it differently. Um, I don't think the both sides argument works here, because so if you want to compare these sorts of things, one party had someone drop out last minute who should have dropped out a long time before that, and then they quickly picked the person who had the best chance at winning, which is just a smart thing to do for a party. Um, if Biden had announced 2 years earlier that he was not gonna run, I'm convinced they would have had a regular primary. The other
Mhm.
side, like, stormed the Capitol to try to overturn an election, a general election. And so I don't think these are anywhere close to comparable. Um, and, yes, certainly Democrats have done things that are heavy-handed and all that. Um, I just think when you put the 2 side by side, I don't think they're comparable, but once again, we're looking at the same sort of events. Actually, we're not. We're because of the way algorithms work, we're fed something totally different. So a lot of the time we're not even aware of what the other person's looking at. But even if we are aware, a lot of this comes down to interpretation. Does this seem to fit the pattern of what wannabe fascist dictators have done in the past? Um, in my opinion, what the current administration does fit that pattern, but that isn't sort of a subjective interpretation.
Okay.
So Titus, I think I hear Allie saying that she's trying to. I think what many of us are thinking that your origin story as the voting superhero that used to be a good Mennonite that doesn't vote is that you realize that Trump is really bad and that there is one side that's objectively worse than the other. If if somebody came in and said that actually both sides are bad, both sides are wielding power, and the Democrats really aren't better, quote unquote, than the Republicans, would that change your perspective on voting?
I mean, both sides are bad. Both sides are wielding power. I just think that it would be um, a unrealistic coincidence if both sides were equally bad. That would be like a glitch in the matrix. That's just not how probability works. And I think if we're smart people, we can make an educated guess about that. Um, so I mean, once again, I don't think the badness of Trump is evidence for my change or is a good reason for me to change my position. I'm being honest in saying it did push me in that direction, but that's not my argument. Trump is bad, therefore I'm voting, or it shouldn't be. But yeah. I wanna we need to move on, but like Allie, I'll let you have the last word here if there's anything you want to say or even one more question.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to understand kind of like the political framework of the current events. I guess then now that I kind of understand, you have kind of solidified with this idea of, okay, I think it's good because people are expressing their opinions and their voice anyway, so what's the harm in voting? Is that kind of where we're
Right.
at then? Okay. Um,
Correct.
where I guess, um, I mean, I feel like there's so many things to say at once, but it's like hard to um go in there. I think as Christians, it's hard to, when I talk to Josh about things like living the Sermon on the Mount life, there's always um I guess instances where we need to act in, I think the correct term would be like retributive justice, on some sort of scale. Like, for instance, I'm a teacher, so I have to correct and I have to enforce, I guess, the law of the school. That doesn't mean I can't show mercy, but if I were to live and act and just say, "Oh yeah, well, it's okay because it's not my role to just, I have to just not um I have to not give you a detention or do this because I forgive you and everything's fine." It's like, no, like you can show mercy and forgive the student, but you still have to enforce your laws of the classroom. I wouldn't say that that's violating the Sermon on the Mount personally. And when I've talked to Josh, I'm like, how do you kind of understand that kind of small sense of retributive justice, or even if you're a parent and you have to discipline your children? Josh said, well, the line is drawn when it comes to using force, when you're forcefully using violence. Is that the line where you still, just so I'm understanding, that you still draw even in the sense of politics?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
If you're serving in a position that relies on violent force, then yeah, I would say that that's wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Would you say
But
that
that's premised on a conviction about nonviolence. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess a question, and it'd be something I'm struggling with too. Would you think that voting, whether it's blue or red, is helping enforce um using violence? Not that you're directly using it, but you're giving somebody the power by giving them their vote to use that, I guess, violent restraint.
No, I don't think so. I think someone is going to run the country. I mean, there's always going to be some organization that gets the power and uses it for their own advantage. It's what government is, whether it's a fascist government or not. And so, um, yeah, I don't think I'm empowering them. I think that there's governments have, some of them have become more conscious to the needs of their citizens. All governments have to be somewhat conscious to the needs of their citizens, but like Western democracies, for example, have become slightly more conscious. And part of that consciousness is asking us how they want them to run things. And so, yeah, that is the crux of the question. I know Matthew's ready to just like make that case, but yeah,
Well,
I don't think that it's.
I think that's also assuming that they are going to do what you ask them to do. And
Hmm.
I think the issue is that politics are just an empty promise. That I think hypothetically, if they really did these things that they said they were going to do, um, that maybe it would be okay. And maybe there are good people in there, but I think the issue is underlying there is a deeper agenda that they're serving and that it's not us. And I used to think, "Oh, I'm not sure about that." Um, but I mean, looking and studying the early church even now, and even with, I think, even recently with seeing the evidence of the Epstein files and reading through those things, that they just sound like crazy conspiracies. We see them mentioning Baal in the files. You can look it up. You can go look it up. I could send you the link if you want. That's telling me that, wow, they really are, there really is a higher agenda. Again, I'm not going to say every single government official is on that file, and there might be some diamonds in the rough, but I think the issue, and this is the way I used to think, very similar to you, is that we actually think that they will do the good things they promise, but I would argue not fully. Now, I think to an extent there is order, as Romans 13, they're given the sword. There's some sort of order that's kept even in an imperfect way. But again, just to reiterate, I do not think they're actually doing what they promise. I think that they have different agendas in place. That's a very large overgeneralization. And I know it's really hard to sum that up shortly, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I'm trying to sum it up shortly because I know Josh and I don't have a lot of time, but you can say something too if you
Well, I
want.
was gonna wait till you're done.
Oh,
Yeah.
you can talk because I've talked so much.
Well, I don't know if Titus is gonna respond to what you said.
No, go ahead.
Well, so my big thing that I guess I would push back is I don't think it needs to. So my pushback to your saying, well, the dualism thing, like saying, oh, they're the same equal evil. Well, you would say, well, no, they're not. That's actually highly unlikely, which is fair. But
Right.
for me, I guess it's just so my pushback, or at least from the way I understand it, is that um if Satan owns all the kingdoms of the world and he says, I give this to whomever I choose, like that's what he said to Jesus, like, do we really think like that's going to be anyone good? Do we really think our vote is going to change any of that? Like that's my main thing is like, like I feel like democracy is almost like an illusion, kind of like you used some analogies before, like when so like often what parents do um when they want their kids to eat vegetables, rather than just telling them you're going to eat vegetables, they'll say, because they'll know their kid will respond rebelliously saying, no, I'm not going to eat vegetables because you want me to. But if you give them the option and say, hey, do you want to eat the broccoli or the carrots, then all of a sudden they'll think, oh well, I hate broccoli, so I guess I'll have the carrots. Meanwhile, you as a parent, it's like, haha, I got them to do it with no fight. And so I think this might just be like a whole big, a whole facade, I guess, is what I'm saying, is like that. I think this is just the illusion of choice where I think, yeah, there might be a lesser evil party or whatever, but like the scriptures, to me, they say avoid even the appearance of evil. And so like it's not just that we pick the lesser evil, it's like that we're supposed to be like completely pure of this stuff. So I don't know, I guess that would be my pushback.
Again, I don't think voting is like a sin
So if
or
someone came
anything.
up,
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was
go
just
ahead,
gonna
finish
say,
your
by the way,
thought,
like I
Allie.
don't think someone's sinning by voting. It's okay if someone disagrees. I mean, I just at this point I've kind of come to the conclusion that I really don't think it's necessary. Like, because I don't think it's helpful. And again, that's my opinion, but
Uh-huh. So, I mean, Josh, to your point, I mean, another analogy is if someone walked up to your mother and said, "I'm gonna punch your mother once or twice. Which would you rather I do?" You can say neither, but they're like, "No, this is the option." You're like, "Well, in that case, once." That's kind
Hmm.
of how I view voting.
Hmm.
It's not. I don't think the government's doing anything that great. I don't think. But if I can answer their question and thereby reduce some suffering, that's what I'm doing.
But do you
Yeah.
think though that is actually doing anything though? Because we have it in scripture that like Satan says, I give it to whoever I will. Do you think your vote is canceling that out? Like,
I mean, this comes. It's funny. Like instead of talking about the sovereignty of God, we're talking about the sovereignty of Satan.
yeah, I
You
know, right?
heretic. Um, but I
Well,
mean, and I think the
do you
same.
Typical
mind?
charismatic.
maybe it is okay,
No,
like
I
to
mean,
vote for
it's
the
an it's
school
an it's
board or
okay.
something, but like, or like, hey, we're gonna
Well,
vote the
so
town hall whether to paint the
I
building
mean,
blue or green.
I
I
could
don't know.
I could go the sovereignty of God route, in that like it does say in like Daniel and others that he does raise kings and put them down. So I could go that route too, but I'm just saying that like
I mean,
these
in
these are
general, yeah. I mean, I think the argument would be similar either way, and it's to say that yeah, the powers, whether it's God's powers or the enemy's powers, animate people and accomplish things in the world, but often it's through image bearers, and so the fact that God or Satan animates people doesn't negate our role as image bearers to do things. This is how God accomplishes things in the world, is through his image bearers, and unfortunately, it's also how Satan accomplishes things. So hopefully I'm not being animated by Satan when I go to the booth. Matthew thinks I am, but we should move on to Sarah. Do you guys want to? Do you have anything final to say? Closing remarks, and then I want to move on to Sarah.
Sure. I mean, all I'm gonna say is when I looked through the Epstein files, it still sounds so weird to say because I keep thinking, oh, it sounds like a conspiracy, but it's not, because we see the things. When I was looking through and I'm like, Josh, look at these people, it was all of these world leaders. It's like they were collabing, doing their weird cult sacrifices. Again, it sounds so weird to say, but you can look that up. And I'm like, wow, it's like all these world leaders were together doing these things. It wasn't just, and it was both blue and red on American side, collabing with France. We saw Israel in there. We saw other countries in the Middle East. And I'm like, wow, this rabbit hole goes down really dark. And it was freaky, so I guess I would just say
Keep away
reconsider.
from
Yeah. Stay. What is it? Stay woke. Stay woke.
Yeah, there you go.
Stop empowering Epstein file
Yeah.
people. Point
Oh
taken.
gosh. Oh man. Anyway,
Okay. Yeah. Hey, thank you both. Hopefully
on
you
that
can stay
note,
on a little longer, but if you jump on, yeah. On that note, I'm going to bed. No, stay on as long as you can. If you need to go to bed, I understand.
yeah,
But thank
I
you both for
probably need
joining.
to. Probably need to, but alrighty. Sounds
Yeah.
good. Thank
Ye-
you.
Okay. Good night.
I'll
See
just
you.
I'll just sit and watch, but you
All
can
right,
switch to
Sarah
Sarah.
Beiler.
I'll listen to the rest of it
Oh,
later.
okay. Sure.
Okay, so the thing that caught my attention initially was the question of whether you can be Anabaptist and vote. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. I cannot really argue against you voting, Titus, because I don't disagree with you much on that. But the part that had caught my eye was that whether you can consider yourself an Anabaptist, which is an interesting question to me. So first of all, though, let's define the terms a little bit. So, like, when you think about, am I still an Anabaptist or does this fit within Anabaptist values? Are you thinking of historical? Like, are you thinking, would those people back in the 1500s who started the movement agree with this? Or are you more thinking of current, modern day Anabaptism? Or maybe it's both one and the same to you?
I guess I'm not thinking as much of what certain people would have agreed or not agreed to because I have no idea. I know that, I mean, modern Anabaptists, some of them, the conservative ones would say no, the progressive ones would say yes. So it's pretty split, modern Anabaptists. What I'm more referring to is the underlying worldview that leads Anabaptists to not vote, which is to say that, bearing the sword is wrong. The government bears the sword, therefore I have to be completely uninvolved, even to the point of voting, even to kind of that radical extreme. I think you can have the underlying worldview that the governments of the world are contrary to the reign of Christ and that violence is always wrong, and that's an Anabaptist worldview that other groups have had as well. But the Anabaptists were one of the more recent ones that had it. And it's how I grew up. And yeah, we've all been influenced by them. So yeah, I think you can have that underlying worldview and still vote.
So, I don't totally disagree with that, but I think it's a maybe a minority viewpoint. Like, I think so my understanding is that the Anabaptists are one of very few, maybe the Quakers also. There's not many. You can find individual congregations, you can find individual pastors who are very peace loving and very opposed to violence, but it's hard to find like a large group. where the whole denomination or the large group of people agree on that. And so that is something that I think the Anabaptists have. Like I see that. So I have, a lot of Amish family. Most of my aunts, uncles are old order horse and buggy driving Amish. And then, as you know, I've been in like various groups, other groups, and then more recently, I've gotten to know some people in the Mennonite Church USA, and it is something I see that they all have in common is that commitment to peace and nonviolence.
Mhm.
So many of them feel like they have to be completely removed from the government in order to stay peaceful like that.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that that's true, but I do think that if we say I'm committed to nonviolence, to peace, to not being a part of the government's force, then um then we're probably no longer in the majority camp of what most Anabaptist people would think.
Mhm.
I don't have numbers or statistics or, facts to back this up. I'm just using what I think is a very common style of argument, which is kind of like, you know me, I've been in, some of the same places you have. I've known Amish people, I've known Beachy people, I've known, all these different Anabaptist people. And so hopefully, um, you'll just believe what I'm saying, even though I don't have like a book or numbers.
Uh-huh.
I've seen this argument style work very well for many people. And so I've been I've been thinking about that. I think of it as kind of the like, just believe it because I said it type of argument. So that's pretty much all I have. The only type of argument I have for you is just like, you know, I've been Amish, I've been Beachy, I've been Southeastern Conference, I've been in a charity group. I've been in places where they say they're not really Anabaptist, but, like,
Who are we
all
talking
their
about?
grandparents
Who are
were.
we talking about here? I feel like we're not talking
Um,
about Followers of the Way, Matthew. We're talking about another church we were both part of, I think.
um, and so I do have one other argument that I can use, and which I think of as name calling. So if you don't believe me just because I said it and because you know me and trust me, then, I will tell you what kind of a person I think that makes you. So I think of you as being a little similar to I have an uncle, had an uncle, he's not living anymore, sadly, who was old order Amish, horse and buggy. And when things got really hard, for him, he had a hard time finding a job at a point in his life. Was in really big financial trouble, just couldn't find anything that worked for him. And he finally discovered that he could learn to drive. And the last time I talked with him, he was telling me how he was taking training for driving a school bus. And he saw himself as still being an Amish man. He wore the clothes. He went to church. Um, was he? I don't know. So, like, if you happen to have seen him, you would be like, oh, there's an Amish man driving a school bus. He saw himself as that. Some other people would have. His brothers and sisters did not see like, to his brothers and sisters, he had left now, or he was in some middle ground somewhere. He wanted to be Amish, he thought of himself as that, but he's driving, which is the dividing line in that group. Once you're driving a car, then you are not part of them anymore. Um, so I don't know how much it matters, but, that's how I
Yeah.
see it is like, if you're gonna be voting, then maybe you're still Anabaptist, maybe not, but for sure you're on the edges, you're in the minority, which is
Well,
fine.
yeah, no, I get that. Do the MCUSA people you've interacted with vote?
I really don't know. I assume I'm What I actually think is that they probably don't have a position on it as a church.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, your point is well taken that, like, Anabaptist does mean something, and it's an important term that people hold dear, and so if I'm saying I'm still Anabaptist and going around and disagreeing with all the positions, then it's should I still call myself that? And another reason maybe I'm not Anabaptist is because 'cause I'm not a member of an Anabaptist church, because there are none in my city. So I don't know if that makes me a not Anabaptist also, but, I like the term. I mean, it's how I was raised, and often we just kind of agree with what we were taught growing up. And so some of these things like nonviolence, would I believe them if I hadn't grown up Anabaptist? Statistically, probably not. Um, I like to think of myself as a free thinker, but all of us are just kind of influenced by how we were raised and the people and arguments we interact with. So, I mean, I use the term because that's how I was raised. I'm still very connected with Anabaptists, relationally, and I still believe a lot of the things that Anabaptists believe. Um,
Could I chime in
but
here
I'm
for a
not
second?
conservative Anabaptist. I by no stretch of the imagine am I anywhere to the right of the most progressive conservative Anabaptist groups like BMA or ADC. I'm not even close there. So when I say Anabaptist, I do not mean conservative Anabaptist.
Just a couple thoughts, if that's okay, Titus.
Yeah, sure.
Um, MCUSA folks I've talked to, most of them would definitely be like very much on the liberal end of the spectrum, almost, more mainline Protestant, just with a strong peace tradition. That's the vibe I get, and a lot of them do vote, but most of them are going to be voting on the liberal end of the spectrum, although there are definitely exceptions. Um, I think it's a more, and I think maybe Sarah, what you were getting at is helpful too. Maybe to sharpen the question is to say, is Anabaptists have a commitment to nonviolence and to following King Jesus and bringing about the kingdom of heaven on earth as we wait for his return. That could be much more theologically nuanced, but that's kind of part of the big idea, right? That we're following Jesus, we're citizens of another kingdom. That's core to what Anabaptism would express, right? And so is that idea of nonviolence and being citizens of another kingdom consistent with voting? And I think Titus and Sarah, you're saying, well, yeah, it is. Is that right?
I think we can be citizens of both. Like our primary allegiance must be to the kingdom of Christ. Like that is far more important. But we do also live here, wherever we are.
And by
And so
saying that we're citizens of both, you're saying that it would then be fine for us to vote within the kingdom of the United States.
I think so. Um, I am surrounded by people who vote now and they talk about it, and I haven't heard anyone saying anything that would like connect voting with violence or force. So, like, I think an Anabaptist view, for some of them anyway, is like it goes beyond just nonviolence. Like, it goes to where we're not going to put any pressure on anyone in the government or in the world around us. And voting is a very small kind of pressure. I mean, if enough people do it, I guess it's not small anymore. But um, so maybe we need to make a difference between violence and like there's violent force and then there's nonviolent force or influence, pressure. I don't know what the best term is for it.
Right. I would
So,
say
so
protesting
non,
is fresher than voting, in my opinion. It's a lot louder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
So I
voting,
I took
you're
a
arguing that. Go ahead.
we took a class at Faith Builders from Steve Brubaker, called Anabaptist Worldview, and he talked about the believing that we should not use any kind of force beyond persuasion, like no vote, no boycotts, no protests. Like he put all of that, and I don't think he would say it was exactly the same, but he put all of that kind of into one category whether you're using actual violent force or whether you're using, money, boycotts, or protests or votes. Like he kind of had that all in one category. And I think that is a common view for a lot of the more conservative Anabaptists,
Mhm.
um, who are, I believe, I didn't pull up numbers, the majority of Anabaptists.
Hmm. Oh,
No, they're not. Drew says no. Um, so that's one way of looking at it is like we're not going to do anything to put pressure and make people do what we want in any way. Um,
yeah.
whereas the larger Christian community, there's a lot of people there that would say we're going to do what we can apart from violence. I think if you want to join that group, that's great.
Just don't call myself
I'm just a little
Anabaptist.
bothered by, the still labeling yourself as Anabaptist. While, um, I don't know, you might want to consider like thinking of your identity more as interdenominational, like choosing what is attractive to you and seems right to you from all the different denominations that you've met and gotten to know.
Right. That's probably more accurate, honestly. But I don't know of a good way to say that I believe in nonviolence. I mean, there's plenty of evangelicals that believe in nonviolence, so maybe I just need to be okay with that. I mean, I don't like the term evangelical either. I don't know what I am. I'm kind of lost, but
Just two more quick notes, Titus. Um,
Mhm.
the question of are we looking at liberal or conservative Mennonites is a really tricky one. And I shake my head because it's not really actually clear. The majority of Mennonites are actually not based in the United States, so they definitely don't look like us in the majority of Mennonites in an American setting. But I take your point there. Just kind of to go off of what you were saying, though, Sarah, we spent about 9 months in a traditional conservative Mennonite church, and for decades now, interacting with conservative Mennonites, there are some super awesome, faithful, like just what you would expect from a Mennonite in the Mennonite heritage that started in 1525 that would reject violence and reject political involvement and all that. Um, but what I see increasingly over and over and over again, the Mennonites that do have political perspectives, it's almost always more conservative. It's anti-immigration, um, pro-business, small taxes, small government, less social safety net, um, all of the traditional conservative talking points because they're listening to the same media. They're listening to the same um, talk show hosts and podcasts as their evangelical counterparts. And what I've
Okay.
sensed in so many cases is that conservative Mennonites, many of them would vote if they could. If their church supported it and there wasn't a standard against it, they would vote, and they would vote in profoundly conservative numbers, overwhelmingly conservative numbers.
I'm
I
I'm
think there's
using
been a
I'm
shift
using
in
the
recent
restroom.
years.
You guys can keep going, or the washroom, as we call it here. I
The
will mute
WC.
myself.
I think there's been a shift in recent years in the people that I know that like more of them are like you're describing where they would vote if they thought they could or if they were allowed to, if they thought it was okay. Whereas I think like when I was, in my teens, when I was first starting to think about these kinds of things, I think more of the people that I knew didn't want to, had no interest in it. And maybe they're at the same place as Titus is, where the things at stake seems so important now that that's making them change. I don't know.
Yeah, and I grew up in a stereotypical ultra conservative evangelical um take America back for God sort of setting. So that I am looking at that through at my interactions with Mennonites through that lens. But with that said, I consistently am surprised to see the exact same mindset. I shouldn't say surprised because it's not at all a surprise, but to see the exact same mindset in Mennonite groups. Like the Mennonite day school in Southeast Asia where we were working, that was run by the missions organization, used ACE curricula, which is like profoundly racist, profoundly um, ahistorical, and very Christian nationalist. And so if that's what we're feeding our Mennonite children, it's no surprise that that's what's coming out.
It's no surprise they end up voting. I studied ACE.
There you go. And yeah, but what happened to you? Because you're like,
Didn't work. Okay, well, let's keep rolling here. Sarah, I'll let you again have the last word, and then we're going to roll over to Matthew.
I'm glad you're reconsidering your views and thinking wider and bigger and realizing that there's more than one way to look at things. And I just encourage you to just kind of drop that Anabaptist label and, um, never be ashamed that you grew up that way or like deny that that's where a lot of your ideas started from. Um, but it's fine to go past that.
Sure. Thanks. Matthew, take it away.
Have I done a Jesus podcast before? I think I've been on
Yeah.
with you guys before, haven't I?
At least once. I think multiple times, yeah.
Well, it's good to be back. I'm glad you
Yeah.
guys are warming up the microphones again.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Where to start, Titus? I have so many things.
I
Let me
know,
s-
I know.
let me start this way. I think that uh, I um I think that m- my practical views require a philosophical framework. And so I don't expect people to accept my premise that don't accept my framework.
Right.
The framework, though, I'm not even speaking specifically about theology. I'm speaking more about a philosophy of government. So maybe let me explain that, and I would challenge a lot of the ideas that you've espoused here tonight, and then I listened to the last talk that you guys did on this issue. You seem to be making equivalencies you're trying to create a moral equivalency. Well, this is worse than that, and so this is less harm, and this is more harm. And I think that's actually the philosophical problem that you're missing. The problem is not in policy. The problem is not an outcome. The problem is in mechanism. The mechanism of state, which you accept on one hand, that it is coercive and violent. It is consolidated violence, but then you say, but this violence is acceptable and or preferable, and this violence is not acceptable or not preferable, and so then I'm going to pick you're just making the lesser of two evil argument, which is the
Right.
opposite of problem that you have, that you're trying to call out, that they're not evil errors. So you're kind of you're kind of admitting the idea that you're picking lesser of two evils. The thing that I would say is that all of these systems are as good and as bad as each other, in the way that they operate, not in what they do. So the American government may be a better place to live for me personally than the North Korean government. But what is actually the function of government as God has ordained it in Romans 13? Why does it exist on his earth? The function of government, in a very Leonard Verduin kind of sense, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before. I know you have. The idea is that that men don't descend into animals. As far as that's concerned, Trump is doing as good a job as Obama did. The purpose of the existing order, the rule that is so that there is some kind of law that men can't just become chieftains of whatever they can control within their arm's reach. We're essentially have governments to prevent descending into warlord feudalism, and you see this happen where you see the breakdown of the state anywhere in modern history, at least, and probably in ancient history, where you see the breakdown of the state. You see this rise of the feudal chieftain, the warlord, and the warlord, he controls as much as he can control until someone bigger comes around, and then we have the consolidation of that warlord power back into the state. picking who is going to be the warlord is never a Christian good. Um, I would challenge even the premise that they aren't equally evil. I mean, ask the people in Gaza if they're equally evil. Ask, from a historical perspective, ask if they're equally evil. Ask the labor movements. Ask the Native Americans. Ask any persecuted group of people who have been under Western power. And it doesn't make any difference for them if it's Democrats or Republicans. Whether there's a difference in immigration or this particular issue, you can make the argument. But the mechanism that's being used is always the consolidation of coercive violence. Whether you vote red or blue, you're voting for violence. Let me break this down one more way, and I'll let go of this framework idea. My one liner is that at the bottom of every ballot is a bullet. And the reason I say that, aside from how pithy it is that let's take the most benign thing we can imagine. I've heard a lot of conversation here, like, well, some voting is okay. Of course, you can vote on a library measure or a firehouse bond. You can't, not from a Christian perspective, and here's why. The government is not a producer. It does not produce. Its only function is coercive violence. It doesn't produce. In other words, it can't exist without tax revenue. That's true of every government order that's ever existed since man has been man. They take from the producer class and they take that as tax, and that's what the government exists off of, whether it's the king or the monarch or the representative government, whatever government it is. It's using taxes as its mechanism for what it has. Now, nobody pays that willingly. Like they don't pass an offering plate for the government tax system. They don't pass the government plate. They don't pass the collection plate for the excise tax for my vehicle that I have here at my house. I am forced to pay that under confiscation of property, harm to my physical being, or imprisonment. They'll put me in a cage, they'll kill me, or they'll take my stuff. That is the currency of every government power. It's legitimate under God because that's how we keep men from descending into animals. I only play an anarchist on the internet. I'm not actually an anarchist because I believe that men would descend into animals if it wasn't for a governing power. But that tax power is at the point of a gun. And so if I vote for a firehouse in my neighborhood, I'm voting potentially against 49% of my neighbors who don't want the firehouse in my neighborhood. And what I'm ultimately saying, if you boil down all the niceties and the civilities, what I'm ultimately saying is to up to 49% of my neighbors, I will send the guns of government after your house and property if you don't pay for the firehouse that I think we should have in the neighborhood. That's how all government works, and that's why it's inconsistent with a Christian position. I mean, we could talk about citizenship too. That's a whole nother issue, and we could talk about the stukia to kosmu, the powers and principalities. That's a whole nother. There's other issues involved, but democracy itself is not a proper domain for a Christian because I'm always utilizing the guns of government against my neighbors who don't agree with me. So the bull analysis doesn't work, Titus. You can't say I'm pushing the bull one day. It's more like this. When you're moving government, it's more like if a bank robber comes in or a masked gunman comes into my house and says, "I'm going to shoot your daughter or your son, you pick." The only moral answer is to say, I'm not going to pick anything. You're the one with the gun, and I'm not going to point your gun anywhere. You're not gonna exempt yourself from any of the evil that you're committing by saying I chose. I'm not choosing where your guns go to anybody.
Okay. All right. You said a bunch of stuff. I wrote down some notes
I
very
always do.
hastily. Um, both sides are always as violent. You said, ask the person in Gaza, would they rather be under a Democrat or a Republican? Um, maybe as it stands, Democrats and Republicans could both be just as violent. I'm not sure. You'd have to look at historic data on that. But for example, libertarians, if we want we want to play this game. Libertarians are non-interventionist. They do not want to. They want to lower taxes. Um, so you can still find a party or a platform that is less violent, objectively, I believe. Now, maybe when they get in power, they'll be just as violent, but we don't know that until they get power.
No, no, that's not true. We do know. We do know. We know for at least two reasons. There is no historical example anywhere in human history where the government has not been violent. I do not believe that the social idea, the social contract idea that governments arose for displacing violence. Governments arose by the collectivization of warlord power. That's my own personal sociological theory, but nonetheless, there's no historical example of a nonviolent government.
I
Everywhere where
agree.
governments have been, they're defined by the bearing of the sword. That's true even in the scriptures. They bear not the sword in vain. Their whole job and function
But
is to bear a sword.
scripture that scripture is talking about police force. It's not talking about military. Firstly, and secondly, there are governments that have been far more violent and caused far more damage than
Well,
other
more
governments.
or less violent is not, for sure, there are more and less violent governments. There is no
Right.
nonviolent government.
Correct.
And certainly in America's history, with our military outpacing the next six nations, those bombs are not window dressing, and all of them drop them. There's not a president in my lifetime that has not used the military for interventionist concerns. It doesn't exist. So that's a fiction that is just not even realistic.
Right. And that's I agree with you. My point is not to say that there's a nonviolent government or a good government. My point is to say that there are governments that have used more, foreign intervention than other governments. And there are platforms that are more hawkish than other platforms. For example, Trump at least proposed raising the military budget by what was it, 50%? Biden did not do that. And so now Trump also campaigned on a platform of peace. So once again, could we have predicted that? Maybe not. But we could predict some of the other damage that he's causing. And so yeah, once again, I'm only responding to one maybe offhanded comment you made in your introduction that both sides are equally as violent. I don't think both sides are equally as violent. I don't
That's not
think both
what
sides.
that wasn't my point. They're not
Okay.
equally violent. That violence is the mechanism of government. That's my
Right.
premise.
Right. I agree. And so if our position is that that is bad, and wouldn't you want a government that does less bad? If you could choose, wouldn't you want a government that's less bad? Less
If the masked
taxes, less
gunman comes in
violent.
my house and says, "I'm gonna shoot your 2 daughters or your 1 son," my answer is, "I don't want anything to do with your gun. I'm not picking 1 son or 2 daughters. I'm not picking any of them. I will not
Mhm.
be complicit. I will not give you any of my authority to use your gun on anybody." And I think it's more the case, and I think there's a good historical reason to believe this, that your idea of pushing the bull is not avoiding a crowd, it's pushing it from one crowd to another crowd.
So are some
It's a
governments
trolley
objectively
problem. It's not a moral absolution.
right? Are some governments objectively worse for human flourishing than others?
Sure. I mean, I'm willing to concede the argument for the discussion. I
And do
don't think
you
that
have
there's any governments that operate under a different mechanism. But
correct, yeah.
some are more violent, and some are more expressive. And the
Some are
cycle
more
of
violent.
history, yeah,
Mhm.
the cycle of history is such that when a government becomes too violent or too oppressive, then you have a revolution and it resets, and
Right.
you go into this chaos phase, and then you get a new government that does what the old one was doing, and then it resets and resets and resets.
And it's not just violence. I mean, I think in an American context, that's on the top of everyone's minds because America is the military superpower and is always going around blowing people up. But like being in India, it's not really about the violence as much. It's about corruption. The violence
Turns
of
out
the
it is here
U.S.
too.
Right, it is. It's becoming more so, which is my point. But like the damage that the U.S. empire does, I think, is primarily violence historically. The damages that governments like India have done is, I would say, primarily corruption. And so, if certain governments, if certain administrations of certain platforms are objectively more corrupt and more violent, and obviously there's sometimes a trade-off. Maybe one government's more corrupt, less violent, and vice versa. But if you can dig your head out of the sand and look at as objectively as possible at these various administrations, as these various ideologies, at look at history and look at how it may be repeating itself, and say that yes, they're all bad, but some of them will cause much more suffering than others. And if we can have an opinion about it, which we do, we're constantly talking about our opinions about it, then I'm not sure why it wouldn't be in our neighbor's best interest to do what we can nonviolently to have the government that's going to cause the least amount of suffering rule the world. I don't think it's endorsing them. It's
I disagree.
so if
Let me
two
tell.
if
Can I
there
tell you why I disagree?
sure.
The only presidential election I voted in was Bush W. first term.
Mm.
And I suffer under a burden of guilt to this day from that. There's up to 1 million dead Iraqis, and that happened in part in one, even if it's 1/100 millionth of a part, because of me. I lent my authority and credibility. Now, here's the real kicker. I think the people that voted for Gore also lent their authority and credibility, because the Christians who voted in that election that I voted in, both of them conceded to that mechanism to decide how the state was going to run. And so if we talk, like, I am political, I'm not apolitical. I'm very political because I have a king and I live in a kingdom and my world is political. I am full of political energy. I love the politics of the kingdom of God. It's an animating force in my life. I am consummately political. I'm not an avoidant and I'm not an apolitical. But here's the deal. All of us, like, I retain my authority and my moral authority and my position as a disciple of Jesus to evaluate what's happening in the world around me. If I concede my vote, so I used to talk about this in the Republican years under DOMA. DOMA was the big scare tactic that drove us all to the ballot box. We got to defend marriage. The gay agenda is going to take over America and it's going to ruin our fabric of society and ruin our children, everything else. And that was the Bush years, remember? So now I watched the inducement of the Christian community to the polls for DOMA. First of all, it didn't work. So, but I'm not much of a pragmatist. But second of all, what my argument is that my moral position on sexual ethics is not up for a vote because it's a truth proposition that I have religiously. So there is no vote to be had about sexual ethics. I do not concede to the vote. If you and I disagree about DOMA, and let's not say you and I, if me and my neighbor disagree about DOMA and he believes in homosexual marriage and I don't, and we both go to the ballot box and he casts his lever yay and I cast my lever nay, both of us together. And this is why the mythology of democracy is very, very important for the maintenance of the structure. And it's why it's actually the counter structure. The revolutionary thing to do is not to vote. The system depends on our complicity with the system. So if we go both vote for DOMA or against DOMA, what we're both saying is that I am willing to use this process to decide this moral concern. I reject that whole thing prima facie. And what I say is my Defense of Marriage Act is my thriving Christian marriage and my growing Christian family. that's DOMA for me. That's already settled. I don't need to vote on it. And I don't care if everybody or nobody votes on it. It doesn't change the moral condition. And it's the same with hating my immigrant neighbors. I'm not, there's no vote to be had. God's already told us how to treat our neighbors. There's no vote to be had. And if nobody or everybody on the planet Earth votes for hating my neighbors, it's already decided in heaven. That's a done deal. I do not concede to the vote. I will not lend my authority, my personal authority, my human sanctity. I will not lend it to the machinery that chews men up and spits them out. I will not give them my voice of authority. Go ahead, Drew. What do you think?
Yeah, I am pretty sympathetic to most of your arguments, especially well, let me say this. I tend to take a bit more of a pragmatic argument, but it really ends up the same place because it's so hard to disentangle. Your example of the Defense of Marriage Act and gay marriage is a great one because I'm opposed as a Christian within my community. I'm opposed to same-sex marriage. That's an oxymoron in my mind. But as soon as and I would like to see traditional marriage in society flourishing, inside and outside of the community of faith. But as soon as we're voting and we're passing legislation, then we're having a mechanism for how that occurs, and we're participating. And that's why I always come back to Paul's admonition that no man that warreth entangleth himself in the affairs of this world.
Yep.
And Titus knows this has been such a long journey because I was so deeply enmeshed in conservative politics. And I've often said I follow politics like some people follow football. It's fascinating to me.
My earliest memories when I was a little boy are watching the Iran-Contra hearings.
Yeah, Oliver North. Yep. He had a show on for a while. Some of my earliest memories, like 7 years old, cleaning the basement out with my dad and listening to Rush Limbaugh. So, quick question though. So you say that anytime you're voting, you are giving consent to use coercion against your neighbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you justify utilizing something like a public library or the fire department or, of course, the roads? Because you have the option to not use the public library, and yet you do, and that is a product of coercive government power.
Yeah. So are the dollars in my wallet. Like you can make an economic argument the same way. And the response to all those things is that I don't feel responsible for the conscription of that violence when I'm not participating it or directing its firepower. Like if there's a library in my town or the next state or 3 cities over, I didn't have anything to do with confiscating anybody's property. Same with the roads. And I don't begrudge the state from doing it. I just don't think it fits within the concerns of a Christian conscience to do that. Like the state has mechanisms, like for all intents and purposes, I can concede that it's better to let a geographic area decide among themselves what 51% of the people, I mean, assuming people vote, and there's a lot of other caveats in that, but presumably let 51% of the people decide where to put a fire station or a library or the house. That's better than just by I guess divine fiat of the king, whatever. That may be better for more people, but it still has as its mechanism the conscription of violence. And that's the line in the sand. That's where I say, as a Christian who is subject to King Jesus, I will not touch that violent mechanism. So when the state has dollars and a military border and a library and whatever else, police protection and all the other things that come from that, both negative and positive, then they are the world that exists. I see those things in my life like Paul saw slavery in his. This is the status quo. It's the world as it exists, and I'm finding my Christian conscience way to navigate what is that they're doing, not what I'm doing. Which is why I think Romans, the pronouns in Romans are structured the way that they are. They bear not the sword in vain.
Yeah, I want Sarah to chime in here. but I do want to kind of put a pin in that. It does feel I think an argument could be made, Matthew, that Titus is drawing the line at, well, I'm going to express my opinion at the ballot box, and you're drawing the line at, well, I'm going to utilize the product of the coercive government power. And you could boycott the library, you could refuse to pay taxes and go to jail. Um, tax isn't a good example because obviously Jesus and Peter and fish,
Well,
but
I
yeah,
would
Sarah,
be a
go
tax
ahead.
protester if it wasn't for Jesus's specific recommendations.
Yeah.
I'll make a comment about the taxes. There is a way to avoid taxes legally, and that is for your income to be low enough that you don't get taxed. I think it's at about 15,000 per person in the U.S. right now.
Life
Um,
goals.
Or have lots
so
of
I
kids.
just want to ask a question and see if I'm understanding you correctly, Matthew. So the way I would summarize what I heard you saying is that because of the violent force that is used, the government is something that you don't want to participate with in any way at all. So when you don't vote, that is essentially a vote for the government to not exist. Like if enough people, maybe it would take, a very large majority, but if everybody did what you're doing and didn't vote, the government would cease to exist, or at least it would cease to exist in the form that we have now. And that's like what your vote is for that government not to be there.
I don't know that that's I don't know that that exactly is a sustainable argument. I think that if everybody did what I'm doing, we wouldn't have enemies. So we wouldn't need a military. So let the taxes go away. But I'm also not saying don't participate in the government. I'm saying don't control the government. Don't be responsible for what the government does.
Right. I think so on some level, it is a form of utilitarian ethics, what I'm advocating for. I think it's very far down the spectrum, though. And I will admit to it is a form of it, but in my mind, far enough away from like doing harm. Um, so I have a question, but first of all, another point. So for example, right now the government is trying to demolish a slum in my neighborhood. Which I'm very against, and most of my friends are very against them doing this. So if they were like, well, we're gonna have a poll and see what the local people say. Maybe some of them don't like how the slum looks, so they're gonna vote to have it demolished. Some are gonna vote to have it stay because they care about the people. I would certainly vote in that poll, and I don't think that therefore implicates me for whatever the government did instead of doing that day. Like maybe they went and like beat someone with a baton that day instead because they were like bored. They didn't have any houses to demolish. I'm not therefore responsible for whatever else they did. I'm simply saying don't do this. And so maybe there's a difference between voting on issues and voting for candidates. But in a sense, that's what I'm doing when I'm voting. I'm not trying to enforce my views on marriage, or I really don't care about any of that when it comes to the government. What I'm simply trying to do is on the issues that I have, from my observation, affect people and cause the most suffering. Issues like violence in the US, issues like corruption and religious freedom in India, issues like economic freedom. Interestingly, I'm a bit of a capitalist in that I believe that free market alleviates suffering. So on
They
some of
should
these,
work on that issue too.
just
I was gonna
throw that
say.
out there. So on the issues that create suffering and alleviate suffering, these big issues, what I'm trying to say is, hey, don't demolish the slum. You're probably gonna go do something else bad instead, but it seems like that other thing is gonna be less bad than this, and so I'm gonna use a little bit of utilitarian ethics and go ahead and say don't do that. The worst
Let
thing.
me let me sharpen your argument just a little bit, Titus. Let me
Please do.
mansplain you.
I'm a
Because it's
man.
one of the questions I wrote down too. Well, for years and years and years, I said that, well, I'm not really actually voting as if I'm casting my whole lot with Ross Perot or Al Gore or whoever. I am just giving my opinion. That if you ask me, I'd say, yeah, I would rather have, uh, you know, yeah, with this guy over that guy. Why is that not valid? That to say that I'm just offering my opinion about the slum. I'm offering my opinion about who would be a better choice to bear the sword.
I preached a message when I did that several years ago when I did that debate on participation in civil structures. I preached a message that Sunday called "Voting an Abdication of Responsibility." Um, I have a few counter arguments to that notion, but one of them, the most pragmatic of them, is that if you cared about the slum, to actually go get involved with the slum is far more valuable to the people who live in the slum than to
That
put a tick on a
but that's a
poll.
false dichotomy. That's a false dichotomy. I can do both. I am
It's,
doing both.
you can do both, but here's the problem with conscripting the government's guns is that the force that's going to be used to either destroy or preserve the slum is not the domain of the Christian. So whether they're standing with guns to prevent people from tearing down the slum, say the opposite's reversed, and everybody wants the slum gone, and they're tired of the effects of the slum on the rest of the community, and the city is in an outrage, and you put your tick mark to preserve the slum, and then the soldiers stand there guard to keep anybody from coming to the slum, is just as violent of an action in that mechanism as it is to destroy the slum. Like, we're going to destroy the community's intent on the one hand, or we're going to destroy the
But
slum on the other hand.
here's the thing, they're gonna use violence either way. So, is
That's
it
the
better
point.
for Yeah, but is it
No,
better
he's got you, Titus.
is it objectively better for a police officer to protect an innocent 5-year-old from a rapist or to shoot Alex Preddy in the head? If they're gonna shoot
This
someone, which are you gonna
this
be more
so
outraged
misses
about?
the point. This so
No, it
misses the
isn't.
point from the Christian
It is
concern. It
the
does,
point
because
is they're
if what you're saying is true, then you should actually go be in the government, right? Because
no, I'm saying
this is the argument. No, no, exactly is. If the government would be better with X than Y, then it would certainly be better if Titus was the local chieftain, or if Titus was the local head of the police, or if Titus was the local governor, or if Titus was the head of the school board, or if Titus was the president.
no, you don't believe in sin leveling, you don't believe that all sin is equal, right?
No, absolutely not.
So, especially when sin has very profound consequences for image bearers, I would much rather, and I'm fine saying this, and I'm fine even doing something about this. I would much rather someone commit a sin that, for example, I would much rather someone punch someone in the face than kill them. Because all sin is not equal. And if I
Now
can do so,
here's the real question, Titus. Would you punch them in the face rather than
no.
somebody else shoot them?
I would not punch. Oh, that way. Yeah, I would definitely. If it came down to punching someone, and this, even if someone's violent and he's going to shoot an innocent person, and punching that person in the face would prevent him from shooting that person, I would definitely punch him in the face, very
So
hard.
this is the problem with utilitarianism. Now keep working that process out. That's why I said what you're really saying is that you should be president. Like, there's no distinction between the argument that you're making. There's no way to stop the way that you're thinking from saying that you should actually wield the power of government, which is
I mean,
really what the vote is. It is wielding the power of government.
so your argument is that any smallest concession to utilitarian ethics means that there's zero difference between that and like the most egregious form of it.
No, I'm saying there's no difference between controlling the government at the ballot box and controlling the government with the gun, or controlling the government with the legislature, or controlling the government with the military. That functionally they're all the same action.
Well, this does come back to the utilitarian thing, I think. Because I am conceding that what I'm doing is on some level utilitarian ethics. But I think it is pretty far from like shooting someone in order to save someone else's life. Pretty far from that. I don't think it strengthens your argument to like make extreme statements that those two are the same thing. I think you can understand, and I think all of us, and maybe I'm being cynical, but I think all of us use utilitarian ethics to some degree. I don't think it's possible.
Granted, that's not actually what I'm after. I'm not after utilitarianism. I'm after what is the mechanism that is at play, like the distinction between the Christian perspective and the citizenship of heaven versus the way that the kingdoms of men operate. Like the reason for our call to King Jesus to be the sufferers instead of the enactors of violence is not just because we're like cosmic road bumps. It actually that it's actually the case that we're actually the agents to fix and change the world. This is why I say I'm not apolitical. I'm not getting out of the fray. I'm not avoiding any of the
Right.
problems of the world with my Christian premise. I'm actually advocating that we get involved with the problems of the world. And what I'm saying is that if you think that the ballot box is the opposite of that case, the ballot box is saying that the state will have my will enacted towards a potentially if it goes my way, and at least complicity with the system if it doesn't, that I've engaged with this system and said that this is how we're going to make these decisions, that is the opposite of what we're actually called to, which is participation, which is being involved with our neighborhoods, which is actually bearing some kind of cross, which is actually feeding the poor, which is actually doing the things that we're supposed to do. That's why I'm not it's not from my perspective, it's not a false dichotomy to say if you cared about the slum, go work in the slum. It's not just that you have to do one or the other, or you can't tick a vote on the way to the slum. It's that it points the focus of God's people on finding some agency within the state mechanisms to resolve what Jesus sent us to
Right.
do, or actually getting in the trench and doing the things that Jesus told us to do.
So yeah, and so I agree with that 100%. If my sort of posture, and I think if you start voting, you're more in danger for this. But if my posture is that I want X, Y, and Z to be accomplished in the world for human flourishing, and I believe that the Democrats are going to be an agent for that, then that I would agree with you 100%. It's not at all what I'm doing. I want X, Y, and Z to be accomplished in the world. My primary way of doing that is through caring for the poor, proclaiming the good news, living out the way of Jesus. And also, there are benevolent forces at work in the world, and if I can do
Malevolent.
anything possible to have less of that, I'm gonna do that as well. Without endorsing it, without trying to accomplish my agenda to the lesser of 2 evils. I wholeheartedly embrace that. That's exactly what I'm doing, is the lesser of 2 evils thing. Um,
Well, at least we
yeah,
So,
agree. I just,
so
I just don't
Matthew,
think Christians should do anything evil.
it's not
yeah.
doing evil. There are agents, and you can God does this. So God uses evil systems for his sovereign purposes, right? I'm doing less than God. I'm simply saying I want there to
For
be
sure.
a less evil system in place. And if I have any agency whatsoever to have a less evil system doing its thing, because someone's going to do their thing. Whether or not I vote, there is going to be an evil government until Jesus returns. It literally, not voting is not some heroic thing that's going to overthrow the government. Just,
But
um,
why would you put your hands in their blood bucket on the way?
I will gladly get my hands a little bloody if it means pushing, and what I mean by that is not shedding the blood, but if it looks like my hands are bloody by pushing the bull out of the way a little bit, and somehow I get some of the innocent blood on me in the process, I will gladly do that if it moves the needle on human suffering a little bit. This is what I'm after. I'm after moving the needle on human suffering without causing human suffering. I just do not accept that voting means I am causing the human suffering that the person I voted for inflicts. It's just now if I was really lazy with my vote and voted for the person who's going to cause more suffering, then yeah, but that's the matter of like being captive to certain ideologies, like and not doing my research properly and all that.
There's so many problems with that because that's what everybody's doing. Everyone who calls himself a Christian is going to the ballot box is doing exactly that, and to opposite ends. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's a
presumably
good argument.
thousands of Amish people who voted for Trump because they thought
Right.
it was the moral choice. I voted for George W. Bush because he was the evangelical. He was the Christian. He was really born again. Like
But
this
you can apply
ad
that
infinitum. It always is the case for why people vote. You're
you
no
can apply
different
that on a
than everybody
theological
else.
level. Yeah, I agree, but you could apply that on a theological level. Well, every Christian denomination claims to have the right ideology and the right way to go about the
But
kingdom of God. Why would
but
you
the
try to plant
but the
followers of the
thing
way? You know?
that's kind of a not a great comparison, Titus, I don't think,
Sure it
because
is.
we're talking about we're talking about how we help people. How do we bring about the goodness of God and the ethics of Jesus' kingdom to this earth? And that's different from that's different from even like theological distinctions. Like Jehovah's Witnesses and Beachy Amish can both go out and help flood victims, and in some small way they are both building Jesus' kingdom, even though I
Yep.
have some pretty strong disagreements with
So
both groups. But let me ask a question
Can
again.
I say
Go
something
for
about
it.
that before you
Yep,
change the
yep.
subject? A better, since we have Sarah on here, um, a better, I think, analogy would be the free sister controversy. So both Matthew and Rebecca Mui believe they are advancing human flourishing by promoting their ideology. They're both believers, right? And so Matthew's argument is, well, every Christian thinks they're doing the right thing on the way to the ballot box. So therefore, why would you go and try to, shake off any ideological sort of tribalism and do your research objectively and vote? I'm like, well, everyone thinks
Category
they're right
error.
about theology that affects real people's lives. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do our best, you know? And we could be wrong.
That
We need to do it humbly, but
No, that doesn't work because in the case of the ballot box, I can point out war after war and suffering after suffering that have come from both options.
but they're not the same. Objectively,
They,
they're not.
I'm actually, I wouldn't mind running around that mulberry bush with you too.
Sarah, you should say something.
I'm having troubles with seeing the government as a group of people that is just being violent all the time, and that's like all they do. Like I see the government as being very complex, having multiple different tasks. I'm pretty happy to pay my property taxes because I know the majority of
I
it
am
is
too.
used for public schools, and I've seen the public schools doing some really, really good things for children who would otherwise not get any education at all. So, I like there's so many different aspects of government that I don't know. If you were only talking about voting for the president and you're thinking of him or her as being the commander in chief of the army, then I think your argument makes some sense. But when I think of like all the many different pieces of things the government does, I feel like maybe you're oversimplifying it, I guess.
I'm talking about how the government functions, Sarah. Like how many, if tomorrow the government said, we're not going to throw anybody in jail or confiscate their property if they don't pay taxes, how many people do you think would pay taxes across the entire United States?
There'd be a few, but but
I
definitely
I
not
think it
everybody
would
would.
probably approach zero within a year. So
So,
my point is that the only way that the government continues to exist is by the mechanisms of force. And like apply it now, take it out of taxes, apply it to the speed limit, apply it to grand larceny laws, apply it to anything else that the government does functionally. Their job is literally violence. Their job is to make things happen. The currency of what the government does, how it does what it does, is through the mechanism of coercive violence. All of them, the laws that they pass, the taxes they collect, everything that the government does uses violence as the one sentence expression of what it means to be the government is do this or else. That is that, and I don't think that's bad. I think that there's a very good function in the world that God ordained, that somebody says do this or else. I grant them their right and their place, and I'm happy to pay my taxes, except for my war taxes. I'm happy to be
which
involved
is like half your
in even
taxes.
helping them in the good things that they do. But I am not under any misunderstanding that the way that they function is through coercive violence.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Even the good things that they're accomplishing, there is at least a threat of violence. If it's not actually being
Yeah.
used, there's the
Right.
possibility of it there.
Right.
So, Matthew, can you talk to us then just a little bit? I need to go to bed in about if voting is more than just giving an opinion, and you are politically active as a citizen of Christ's kingdom,
Mhm.
is it appropriate for Christians to voice their opinions in the public square and say Donald
Yeah.
Trump is X and Kamala Harris is Y? To say, I wish that the government would make abortion illegal or make abortion more legal or whatever the proper perspective is supposed to be.
That's a great question. My thesis is that we should. I almost would say that we must. I am now. Let me add one. I don't know that we should comment on the people in those positions, but the moral positions of a particular group of people, a society. I think we should. The way my operating thesis is this: that the church is functionally to the society what the soul is to the body. So we should be like the conscience of the world. Like what the church should be doing is expressing what's right and what's wrong to the world around us, the same way that a conscience functions within me, either accusing or excusing me, like very Romans 3 kind of stuff. That's what the church's job should be in the world. We should be the agents of conscience. Now, and the analogy flows all the way through. My conscience can't make me do anything, but I also can't shut it up. No matter, I mean, you can actually burn it out, and you could probably burn the Christians out of an area too. But in general terms, you can't make your conscience be quiet, and it also can't actually make you do anything. And that's a perfect analog for what the church should be in the world, and why the like apolitical, abandon the public square idea of non-resistance and Christian kingdom ethos is as much of a problem to me as the idea of the evangelical ideas of just whole hog, let's get in and run it ourselves.
So it would be fun for us to make comments on factual things. The
Yeah.
president is corrupt.
And you
The
would
Pope is
protest,
Catholic,
Matthew. You would
and
Yeah.
protest, Matthew.
I come from
and
an
it's
activist background. I've done anti-war protests. I've done
Yes.
anti-abortion protests, and
Okay.
everybody thought I was a Republican in the '90s. I mean, in the early 2000s, and then everybody thought I was a Democrat again, and everybody thought I was a Republican when I said it was ridiculous that Obama got a peace prize for bombing Yemen, and
Mhm.
now everybody
and
thinks I'm a liberal.
the reason people scratch their heads at you, Matthew, and say, "How could you be so political as to protest?" is because people jump to the assumption that if you're voicing anti-war sentiment, you must be a Democrat. If you're voicing pro-life sentiment, you must be a Republican. And you're
Here's the
seeing a pox on both their houses. Go ahead.
here's the
Yes.
thing, though. Even protest is, the fact that you weren't put in jail yet, is a testament to a government that, at least on paper, wants to listen to their citizens. And when I would say that going out and protesting is a more dramatic form of pressure than voting.
I agree.
Um, and well, there you
It's a
go.
better
Like
conscience.
you are telling them don't go
He's
to
not
war with this
outsourcing
country.
things, though.
You're saying don't go to war with this country. Well, they're gonna go do something else bad then, Matthew. They're gonna go to war with another country, or they're gonna go tax someone. You're doing the exact same thing.
And
You're
just like
like,
the
this is a
conscience,
really
I'll keep
bad thing.
following them around and telling them the same thing.
Well, that's great. But God forbid you follow a less extreme version of them asking your opinion, eh, which is at the ballot box.
I don't
They're being
concede that a
polite
ballot
enough.
is asking somebody's opinion. A ballot
So
is
here's the
the
thing.
choice for who the government will force to comply or not comply.
So I do think the burden of proof is on you to say when you vote for someone that therefore you are complicit for all of their actions. That's a claim you're making, and I think there's a pretty big gap between that claim and like, yeah, reality, that somehow you need to connect those two things for me.
That's what I've been trying to do is I'm saying, how does that office and role function without violence? Whatever you're voting for, how does it get enacted?
Right. So in I'm not actually saying I want the Democrats to do what they're doing if I vote Democrat. And can you I would hope that you would you would be generous enough to say, what, Titus, when you go to the ballot box, you say this is what you are doing, therefore that's what you are doing, right? That, I mean, you can I that would be what I would request that you would do. So when I go to the ballot box, I'm not
How
saying
about
I
I
want.
concede that's what you think you're doing?
Sure, that's fine. When I go to the ballot box, I'm not saying the Democrats are amazing and I want them to go around and bomb Russia and tax people super heavily and all the bad things they do. I'm simply saying, in the same way that a protest is saying, I would rather you not, declare war on Iran. What I'm saying is I would rather this bad thing not happen and a less bad thing happen. It's simply that's literally all I'm doing. I'm not putting my stamp of approval on anything. That's
The
what I
problem
think.
is, Titus,
But go ahead, Drew.
the problem is, Titus, is that the foundational idea of the United States is that your vote actually does potentially make a difference. And so you
Sure.
can't have your cake and eat it too. And so confession time, I have somewhat recently come to the conclusion that I shouldn't vote. And it's been a long process. And I'm still kind of wishy-washy on like local, like voting for a non-political office, but I'm still thinking, and Matthew's been pretty persuasive tonight, although I still have some objections. Anyhow, um, the problem is, every time I voted, I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that my person wasn't going to win. That voting for a third party was not going to make an impact. And so I felt fairly safe that way because I knew that it wasn't going to change anything. But if you vote, you're playing into the system. And in an ideal world, you are actually saying that I would like my guy to be voted in who will make decisions with the power of the government behind him, the power of the military behind him, the power of ICE behind him. He'll make decisions because I put him in there. And so you can't claim to be like, well, voting doesn't really make a difference. I'm going to do it anyway. Voting
No,
is
that's
just
not what
offering
I'm
an
saying.
opinion.
I want it to make a difference. I'm not saying I want my guy to do this. Once again, like, just trust me, he's not my guy. I'm saying I want him rather than this. This objectively will cause less suffering than this.
But you
I'm
know
not
that
about.
the less suffering is still suffering. It's still
Yes.
violent atrocity.
There is, but that's going to happen until Jesus returns. There is going to
But it
be
doesn't
some
have to happen with your authority and influence.
right, and that's the jump you're making. You're saying that I'm giving them my authority. I'm not. They are going to have
That's
authority
You for
literally
whether
sure
what voting
are,
is.
because you wouldn't go if it wasn't lending your authority to the change of the guard.
I don't have. See, I'm not doing this whole patriotic duty thing. I have zero
I
as a
think you're arguing the
nonviolent.
wrong thing. I get it. You don't. Let's call them the Zebu Party instead of the Democrats. I don't care. Like I get it. You're not. You're just. It's harm mitigation. I'm
But
saying the harm mitigation is still creating harm, and that
as a
the
nonviolent
Christian
person,
position should be do no harm, like a
right?
doctor.
As a nonviolent person, I have zero control over whether someone is going to use the sword in America or in any country. There will always be a gang with a monopoly on violence.
Which is why no Christians should participate.
No, my point is, whether or not I vote, that will happen. I am not lending my authority to them by voting, because either way, that's going to happen. I'm simply saying there are two opposing gangs. One is more violent and oppressive than the other. I want the less oppressive one to reign so there's less suffering until Jesus returns and sets up his peaceful kingdom. Like, don't we want less people to suffer? Like that's and if that means that like I look like I'm meddling in the affairs of Babylon and I'm less spiritual, so be it. I don't care about any of that. Like it's going to happen either way. There's going to be some violent like regime doing its thing. I want the less violent one. And if I can move the needle in any way on that, seeing how it affects people, like I would like to do that. We're an hour and
So
52 minutes into this.
yeah, I want to say two little pieces and then bid you a good night. But I really appreciated this. Just personally and pragmatically, in the 3 elections since we've been back in the States. It's hard to believe. Um, I was working in a public school and in a very blue public school, and every every year after November, the first Tuesday in November rolled around, I would go in the next morning and people would literally be crying because President Trump was elected. They know that I'm a conservative, whatever that means, Christian. And by being able to look them in the eye and say, I didn't vote for him and I don't support him, and then talk about that, even though I'm pro-life and they're pro-choice, to talk about that from a position that's in some way standing outside of the system was super powerful. And if I had gone and chosen the lesser of two evils between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and chosen Donald Trump, I really would have lost my voice in that situation because I would have been part of the system. With that said, it's kind of funny because was it last night or this morning as of our recording? I totally lost the guy's name. The guy who took the mantle from MLK Jr. Just passed away. And I was
Jesse
thinking about him
Jackson.
today. Thank you, Jesse Jackson. And super problematic character, even as I think he was fighting for some worthwhile causes like civil rights. I think there's value in extending grace, especially to the African American community who's fought really hard against all manner of injustice, against extending grace to immigrant communities. I don't want voting or not voting to be like a litmus test for who's headed in the right direction, who's headed in the wrong direction. I get what a challenge it is to say, yeah, you've been oppressed for, hundreds of years, or your families are being shot or deported, and we don't think you should have any voice in the system as to what happens. And I think Matthew has given us some hints. I would like to be able to help them find voice in actually efficacious ways that are consistent with the kingdom ethic. But I also think there's real value in showing like grace and not coming down like dogmatically, especially for people who aren't, white, moderately wealthy Americans.
Yeah, and along with well, not really along with that. It's kind of a separate thought, but I think
I'm used to it.
I am not fully convinced about the position that I've been arguing. It's just Matthew, so I'm going to argue with him. And this is actually the way that I kind of process what I believe. Is by arguing about stuff, and so
Especially with me.
right. The jury is out on whether I will vote or not. Not that people probably care that much, but um, this has been helpful, and I'm gonna keep thinking about it. I think I still believe what I was arguing for. But yeah, the point of this was to be a conversation that kinda helped me think through this, helps our listeners think through this, and it got combative because that's what we do. But I just wanna put a disclaimer out there that I don't fully embrace what I was arguing for, at least not to the level that Matthew embraces what he was arguing for. So, yeah.
It's a good clarification.
Okay, does anyone wanna
I think your point's well taken, Drew. I obviously have strong feelings about this. I think part of it. It's penance for my guilt for voting for George W. Bush and being responsible for wars of aggression across the Middle East and my repentance is a part of my passion, and also repenting from a life of violence and all these things. I think that the church should have strong positions on this stuff, but I also know that a lot of people engaging in the political process via voting are doing what they think is right. And I can meet somebody at that place. I want to have conversations about the best ways to do things right. I can sympathize and understand with the desire to mitigate harm, the desire to change outcomes. And I would love to have follow-up conversations about what's the Christian alternative to voting, which is a much more healthy conversation to have.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Allie went to bed. Josh is still here. You want to talk about NAR a little bit, Josh? NAR likes to vote. Anyway, yeah, thank you everyone for joining. That was a joke. Let's not. Okay. All right. Right. Did you endorse IHOP back then?
Mm.
Yeah. Very enforced. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for the opportunity. Talk to you later.
Yep. Bye.